Posted on r/true off my chest. I should have known this was coming. I should have seen the signs. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment my own parents stood up, raised their glasses, and declared, "We've decided Lucas's college fund will go to Jason instead. He needs it more." Just like that, years of sacrifice, of careful planning, of doing everything right for my son gone. They didn't ask. They didn't even pretend to care what I thought. They just decided, like it was theirs to give away. And when I opened my mouth to protest, my father cut me off. "This is what's best for the family." As if Lucas wasn't family. As if my son, the one who worked tirelessly, who got into his dream school, who did everything they ever asked of him, wasn't even worth considering. I sat there, stunned, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Lucas was silent beside me, his face pale. And my mother? She just smiled, as if they'd done something noble. I've let them push me aside my whole life. I've swallowed their favoritism, their manipulation, their endless excuses for why David and his son always came first. But this time, they went too far. Because what they didn't know was, I saw this coming, and they have no idea what I did about it. If you've ever been the lesser child in your family, if you've ever watched the people who were supposed to love you take everything you built and hand it to someone else, you need to hear this story. Subscribe to Reddit True Vault for more real-life stories that deserve to be told. Posted on r/true off my chest. I should have seen it coming. The way my parents treated David like he hung the moon, while I was just there. It started early. I don't even have a single memory of them looking at me the way they looked at him. David was the golden child, the pride and joy of the Hayes family. And me? I was an afterthought. I remember birthdays the most. David's birthdays were grand events, big cakes, presents stacked high, balloons filling the room. Mine? Sometimes they'd remember to say, "Happy birthday." If I was lucky, my mom would throw a store-bought cupcake on the table and call it a day. I was 7 the first time I realized it wasn't normal. I had gone to a friend's birthday party. There were decorations, a piñata, laughter, parents who looked happy to be celebrating their child. And when I got home, I asked my mom, just once, why David always got a party and I didn't. "Girls don't need all that," she said, brushing me off. That was the first time I understood. I was never going to matter the way he did. School wasn't any better. I worked my ass off. Straight A's, top of my class, teachers who always praised me. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was good enough, maybe they'd finally be proud of me. But no matter what I did, David was always more important. When I brought home my report card, full of perfect grades, my dad barely looked up from his newspaper. But when David managed to scrape by with a C in algebra, they took him out for ice cream to celebrate his hard work. And if I ever slipped, if I brought home anything less than an A, the disappointment was immediate. "You should know better, Rachel. You have to work harder. You can't afford to slack off." David was never expected to try harder. Never expected to be better. He was enough just as he was. I spent years chasing something that was never going to exist. Their approval, their love, and the worst part? I still wanted it. I still needed it. I told myself if I could just be perfect, if I could just do everything right, maybe one day they'd see me the way they saw David. But I was wrong, because now, at 43 years old, after everything I've done for them, they've made it painfully clear. David was the child they wanted. I was just there. I told myself it would get better when I grew up. That if I worked hard enough, if I became successful, they'd finally see me, finally love me the way they loved David. But I was wrong. Because to them, love was never unconditional. It was transactional. I spent my entire life trying to make them proud. Straight A's. Perfect behavior. No trouble. No complaints. I worked hard, kept my head down, and did everything a good daughter was supposed to do. I put myself through college. Scholarships, part-time jobs, late nights spent studying until my eyes burned. My parents never helped. They never even asked how I was doing. But I told myself it didn't matter. Because once I made something of myself, once I had a career, they'd finally see me. I graduated. I built a life. I met Eric, fell in love, got married. We had Lucas, our son, our pride and joy. We weren't rich, but we were stable. We worked hard for everything we had. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was enough. Eric showed me what love was supposed to feel like. When I got my first job, he was the one who popped a bottle of champagne and told me he was proud. When I gave birth to Lucas, he was the one who held my hand, whispering that I was incredible. And Lucas? From the moment I held him, I knew I would never let him feel like I did growing up. He would never have to fight for my love. He would never have to wonder if he was enough. For the first time in my life, I had a real family. One that didn't make me feel like I had to earn my place. But my parents? They didn't care. When I called to tell them I got my first real job, "That's nice. Have you talked to David? He's having a hard time. When Lucas was born, we'll visit when we have time. But you know, David could really use some help right now." I should have seen it then. Should have understood that no matter what I did, I would always be less in their eyes. But I didn't, because no matter how much they hurt me, I wanted to believe they loved me. I wanted to believe that if I just kept giving, if I just proved I was good enough, they'd finally see me the way they saw David. So I kept trying, and that's when I realized they were never going to be proud of me. They didn't care about my accomplishments. They only cared about what I could give them, because to them, I wasn't a daughter. I was an investment. The requests started small. A little help with bills here. A loan there. I told myself it was normal. Kids help their parents, right? So I sent money. Not a lot. Just enough to ease the burden. But the thing about people like my parents, enough is never enough. "Rachel, we raised you. We sacrificed so much for you. The least you can do is help your family. David doesn't have what you have. He's struggling. You wouldn't let your own brother suffer, would you?" Every time they called, it was the same conversation, the same guilt. And every time, I gave in, because I thought maybe, if I gave enough, they'd finally love me back. But they never did. And deep down, I think I always knew they never would. I didn't find out the truth until I stumbled across a post on Nextdoor. I wasn't even looking for anything. I was just mindlessly scrolling, half paying attention, when I saw it. A post from one of my parents' neighbors. Not many grandparents would make such a sacrifice for their grandson's future. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Until I kept reading. Until I saw the comments. People congratulating my parents. Talking about how inspiring it was that Walter and Linda had given Jason a full college fund. My heart stopped. That wasn't possible. My parents didn't have that kind of money. And then it hit me. Oh my God. No. 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 I don't even remember grabbing my phone, but suddenly I was calling Eric. "They took it," I said, my voice shaking. "They actually fucking took it." He didn't need to ask what I meant, because we already knew. This wasn't the first time my parents had pulled something like this. For months, they had been hinting at Jason's struggles, his potential, the fact that Lucas could always take out loans like everyone else. Eric and I had talked about it. We had seen it coming. And that's why, a month ago, we moved every single cent of that money out of their reach. I had hoped we were wrong, but we weren't. Lucas's graduation dinner was supposed to be a celebration. We had picked a nice steakhouse, nothing too fancy, but nice enough to feel special. We were sitting there, eating, laughing, celebrating my son. And then, the sound of a fork clinking against a glass. I knew. Before she even spoke, I knew. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, my mother, Walter, and I have a very special announcement." I felt Eric shift beside me. Lucas went still. "We've decided," she said, smiling, "that Lucas's college fund will be going to Jason instead." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Lucas froze beside me. I could feel Eric tense. David smirked. My father nodded like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "It's what's best for the family," he added. "Jason's had a rough time, and this will really help him get his life back on track." I didn't react. Not because I wasn't furious. Not because I wasn't sick with rage, but because I already knew. I had known, and so had Eric. Eric chuckled. Low. Amused. My mother blinked. "What's so funny?" Eric set his drink down, leaning back. "That's funny," he said. "Because we moved it last month." And just like that, everything fell apart. The moment those words left Eric's mouth, my mother turned red so fast I thought she might actually pass out. My father slammed his hand on the table so hard the silverware rattled. "You had no right." My mother snapped. Eric raised an eyebrow. "No right to protect our own son's future? That money was meant for family." My father barked. Something inside me cracked. "Lucas I.'s family," I said. "And that fund was his. You had no say in it." My mother scoffed. "Jason needs this. You know how hard things have been for David." And just like that, it all clicked. They had never planned for that money to be for Lucas. Not really. They had just been waiting for the right moment to swoop in and take it. And they had chosen tonight, on one of the most important days of my son's life, to tell him, in front of everyone, that his future didn't matter. I turned to Lucas. He wasn't even looking at them anymore. He was just staring down at his plate, his hands clenched into fists. "Fixing things," I repeated. "You mean like the last time Jason got arrested and you bailed him out?" "And I'm a mother doing my best," I shot back. "And you just told my son that his future doesn't matter. That you were stealing his chance at the life he worked so hard for." And then, the final nail in the coffin. "Oh, please," my mother scoffed. "Lucas can take out loans like everyone else." Lucas stood up. "You know what?" Lucas's voice was quiet, but it hit like a punch. "I don't need anything from you." No one said a word. My parents just stared at him like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Like they hadn't just ripped his future away from him. Not your money. Not your fake apologies. Not your excuses. I don't need any of it. And I definitely don't need you in my life. Eric was already standing, his hand on Lucas's shoulder. A silent let's go. I felt my own body moving, but my mind was somewhere else. I looked at them, my parents, David, Jason, and I knew. This was it. You had your chance, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Again and again, you've shown me exactly who you are. And tonight, you made sure we'll never forget it. And then we walked away. I could hear my mother's voice behind me, shrill and furious. My father's deeper, full of barely contained rage. Ungrateful. You're tearing this family apart. But they didn't follow us. Because they knew. They knew they had finally gone too far. I didn't look back. Not even once. And for the first time in my life, I knew I never would. But what I didn't know was just how far my parents would go to try and take that money back. And that's when the real battle began. I thought losing my son's college fund was the worst thing they could do. I was wrong. A few days after the graduation dinner, Eric got a call from the bank. I wasn't paying attention at first until I heard him say, "Excuse me, what withdrawal?" I turned to look at him. His face had gone pale. The call didn't last long. When he hung up, he just stared at me for a second before saying, "They tried to take money from our account." I felt my stomach drop. Who? Eric didn't answer right away. He just exhaled, ran a hand through his hair, then finally said it. "Your parents." I think I laughed. Just one short, bitter sound. What? They called the bank pretending to be us. Tried to withdraw $25,000. Gave some of our personal details. But the bank flagged it because the voice didn't match. I sat down. My head was spinning. They actually did this. They actually fucking did this. We locked everything down. Froze our accounts. Changed passwords. Flagged our credit. I thought that would be enough. Then the letter came. I was in the kitchen when Eric walked in, holding an envelope. "It's from a lawyer," he said. My hands were already shaking when I tore it open. "They're suing us." My parents. The same people who stole Lucas's college fund. Who tried to empty our bank account. Who pretended to be me. Now, they're taking us to court for financial compensation because they supported me growing up. Eric put the letter down. This is fucking insane. I stared at it, at the words printed in black and white. I felt nothing. Just this hollow, sinking feeling. Then the rage hit. I grabbed my phone. Dialed my mother. I shouldn't have. But I did. She picked up after 2 rings. "Rachel, honey, you're suing me?" I cut her off. A beat of silence. Then she sighed, like I was some child throwing a tantrum. "Rachel, don't be dramatic." Dramatic. They stole from my son. They tried to rob me. And now they want me to pay them? "You left us no choice," my father cut in. No choice. Like this was just the natural order of things. Like they were entitled to everything I had. And I was the one being unreasonable. I almost laughed. "You're out of your fucking minds." Eric took the phone from me. "Drop this now," he said. A long pause. Then my father, voice cold as ice. "Or what?" Eric didn't miss a beat. "Or you'll regret it." Click. They hung up, but I knew them. This wasn't over. Not even close. A week passed. Silence. No calls. No emails. Nothing. Then a letter. A thick, official-looking envelope from their lawyer. I didn't even want to open it. But I did. Inside? A demand for settlement negotiations. They wanted money. They actually expected me to pay them off. I don't even know how to process this anymore. My own parents are suing me. Not for some misunderstanding. Not for some petty argument. They want my money. They want compensation for raising me. Like I was some long-term investment. Like I owed them for simply existing. Eric was furious. He read through the letter, shaking his head. "We should countersue." I couldn't even look at him. My hands felt numb. My head was spinning. "They actually did it," I muttered. "They actually fucking did it." Eric's voice softened. "Rachel, they committed fraud. You know that." I did. Of course I did. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I kept thinking, maybe this was another trick. Maybe they were bluffing. Maybe if I just talked to them. But no. No. I had spent my entire life hoping they would change. That if I just did more, gave more, loved more, they'd finally see me. Appreciate me. Maybe even love me. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Lucas. I opened my laptop, my fingers trembling as I logged onto Reddit. r/true off my chest. I stared at the blank postbox for a long time. Then, I started typing. I've put up with a lot from my parents. A lifetime of being the lesser child, of being the one who had to sacrifice, while my brother got everything handed to him. I thought I could take it. I thought I could swallow it down, for the sake of family. But they stole from my son. And now, They're suing me for money because they think I owe them for raising me. And you know what? I'm done. I am so fucking done. I hit post before I could overthink it. And as I sat back, staring at the screen, I realized something. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready to fight. I thought they'd stop after the bank shut them down. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I got a thick envelope from a law firm. My parents were suing me. They wanted their contribution to Lucas's college fund back, money they had put in when he was a baby. I checked my records. Their so-called contribution? $1,500. That was it. Meanwhile, Eric and I had saved over $80,000 across 18 years. And now, they thought they could take it all. Eric scanned the lawsuit and scoffed. They don't actually expect to win. They just want to make our lives hell. And even though I knew I'd win, I still hated the idea of wasting my time and money on something so ridiculous. Court day came. My parents sat smugly on the plaintiff's side, acting as if they had already won. They had a lawyer, but they had no case. Numbers don't lie. 15 minutes. That's all it took. I won. But there was a catch. I had to return their contribution plus interest. A trivial amount, but the fact that I had to give them anything at all, it made me sick. They should have been ashamed. They weren't. A week later, I got a call from the IRS. Mrs. Dawson, your tax records have been flagged due to a report of potential fraud. We'll need you to cooperate in a full review. I nearly laughed. They actually thought this would take me down? I wasn't a tax cheat. But my parents were. Eric barely even reacted when I told him. Just shook his head and muttered, "Figures." 15 years ago, he helped them set up some rental properties. He had seen their tax records. And he knew, without a doubt, that they had been lying on their taxes for over a decade. I sat with that information for a long time. Thought about everything. Thought about how they had done this to themselves. Then I picked up the phone. Called my mother. "Did you actually report me to the IRS?" She scoffed. "Actions have consequences, Rachel." I let out a breath. "Yeah? Well, would you like the IRS to take a closer look at your rental income? You know, the money you and Dad forgot to report for the last 15 years. Silence. A long, shaky silence. Then she whispered, "You wouldn't." I laughed. "Try me." 2 days later, the IRS called back. My case had been dropped. I thought that was the end of it. Then, one night, the cops showed up at my door. Jason. They caught him inside my house. He had broken in. He had a knife. Jason was arrested on the spot. White as a ghost when he saw Eric standing there, holding a baseball bat. The police said he told them he was just taking back what was his. I didn't know what exactly he was planning to do, but I knew one thing for certain. They sent him. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, logged into Reddit, and I wrote, "They didn't just try to steal my son's future. They didn't just sue me. No, they sent my nephew to break into my house with a knife. I'm done. Completely done. This ends now. If they could take everything from me without hesitation, why the hell should I feel guilty for letting them face the consequences?" I used to wonder what it would feel like. Walking away, cutting them off, saying, "No more." Would it feel like relief? Would it feel like grief? Would it feel like I was making the biggest mistake of my life? Now I know. It feels like finally being able to breathe. After everything, Eric and I packed up and moved. A fresh start, in a place where my parents can't reach us. They don't know our address. They don't know our neighborhood. If they ever come looking, they won't find us. And that, more than anything, is peace. Lucas settled into college last month. He was nervous at first. He kept checking his phone, like he expected his grandparents to pop up and try something else. But now, he's thriving. He has a great roommate, already joined a few clubs, and for the first time in his life, he's living for himself. Not for my parents. Not for their approval. Just for him. I didn't realize how much weight I'd been carrying until it was finally gone. And Jason? That was the one thing I never saw coming. Jason called Eric a few days after everything collapsed. Eric told me later, Jason barely spoke at first. Just sat there, quiet, like he didn't even know where to start. And then, out of nowhere, he said, "They never actually cared about me, did they?" Eric didn't sugarcoat it. "They cared about what they could get from you." Silence. Then Jason just let out this bitter laugh. "Yeah, I think I knew that. Just didn't want to admit it." That was the last time we saw him. He left town soon after, got a job, found a tiny apartment, and cut contact with my parents on his own terms. I don't know if he'll ever reach out again. And honestly, I don't know if I care. But I do know one thing. My parents got exactly what they deserved. A cousin of mine, someone I haven't spoken to in years, sent me a message out of the blue. A simple text, "Guess your parents aren't doing so well." Turns out, after everything fell apart, they had to sell off one of their rental properties to cover their legal expenses. Then another, and another. The IRS didn't forget about them, either. They had to settle, big time. David? He cut them off too. Once the money dried up, he suddenly wasn't the golden child anymore. Jason moved out, started his own life, and wanted nothing to do with him. Now, it's just the two of them. Alone. And me? I've never felt freer. For years, I kept waiting for my parents to see me, to recognize everything I did, to finally love me the way I deserved. But they never did. And they never will. And now, sitting in my new home, I realize that's okay. I'm not writing this because I want sympathy or validation, or for anyone to tell me I did the right thing. I'm writing this because someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe it's you. Maybe you've spent your whole life trying to be enough for people who will never love you the way you need. Maybe you've told yourself that if you just work harder, give more, sacrifice more, they'll finally see you. They won't. Family isn't about blood. It's about who chooses you. And if you've been waiting for permission to walk away, to choose yourself, this is it. I did. And now, I finally have a place to call home. Sometimes, we come across stories on Reddit that we just can't ignore. Stories that make us stop, think, and maybe even question what we'd do in the same situation. This was one of those. Rachel's story wasn't just about money. It was about fighting for what's right. About refusing to let toxic family dynamics control her life any longer. And in the end, she did what so many people wish they had the strength to do. But what do you think? Was she right to cut them off? Could she have handled it differently? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you want more raw, real, and shocking Reddit stories, subscribe to Reddit True Vault. Because the truth? It's always wilder than fiction.